yeah, welcome everyone. So this is going to be the final one today. If you have missed any of the last sessions, I know we were having some technical issues last week. So if anyone missed that one, I am going to recap for like the last 3 weeks, a very shortened version of that, and then we just have a final couple things that we're going to cover with this workshop here tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share. Okay, and everyone's seen the, cool, awesome. All right, so this is going to be number 4. There we go. Okay, so what we're going to cover this week, we're going to recap, as I said before. Then we're going to talk about melody and harmony as well. And then we're going to talk about song structure. All right, so to recap, so all the way from the beginning, so what is music theory? Why should I learn it? So as far as like, if you're thinking of like which came first, the chicken or the egg, music comes first. Music theory came after to explain what we're hearing and how to replicate, when someone plays something, then we're like, oh, that sounds nice. How do we do that again? And how do we do that in different ways? That's what music theory is. So it is not 100% necessary to learn it to be able to play music. As we talked about in that first week, many successful, talented musicians never learn music theory. They don't know how to read music. You may know so much more than than some really famous people. But that doesn't mean that it hurts anything to learn, and it can only help you more. And it just gives you that ability to talk to any musician who plays any instrument about music, because music theory isn't just guitar or just piano. We've been kind of just using that like binary of guitar and piano because they're very accessible instruments, and they're very common instruments, especially for people who are getting started and want to start like writing songs, composing, and playing. Those two tend to be ones that people learn. But it applies to anything. So you're talking to a trumpet player, if they speak the same language, music theory, sheet music, they're going to understand a C is a C, sharps, flats, all of that. That transcends genre and transcends instrument. So it gives you the ability to talk to anyone about any song. And once you understand how to read music and how to know what you're looking at, and okay, this is how I play this tempo, this is this time signature, key, and all of that, you can really play any song. Any song that you can get your hands on the sheet music of, or even if someone has written, it down or for you, like maybe it's not the official sheet music, but someone's like, well, this is what it sounds like to me, and you play it and you're like, oh yeah, that is pretty close. You'd still know how to play it. And you would be able to kind of tell like, oh, you know what? I think this actually needs to be this note. And that's kind of like the benefit to really practicing and learning that is be able to play by ear. So further with our recap, treble versus bass clef, one of the first things that we learned. So your treble clef, we're also called our G clef. You'll know you have written it correctly when this sort of line here is circling that G note there. The lines, every good boy does fine. And in the spaces, F-A-C-E, spelling face. And then bass, which is going to be lower. So remember our grand staff, that top top bar lines are treble, and then the lower one's bass, and they meet right in the middle with middle C. So then for bass, we have G B D F A, or good boys do fine always, and then the spaces, all cows eat grass. And if and I don't have it here on the screen, but if we had our grand staff out and we wrote these letters and we kept going, A, and then we go one more space here, B, another line, C, space D. When we go on that line, that'll be this E here. So that's how they meet in the middle. So sharps, flats, and naturals. So especially when we're talking about like a piano, I have my, I can be able to see it. My camera doesn't pan down far enough. But we're talking about the white keys on a piano. Those would be your naturals. So they have not been pitched either sharp or flat. So sharp is when they're higher in pitch, one semitone. So we're talking about the piano, that would be like going from a white key to a black key to the left versus going to a black key to the right. And if you remember in harmonics, so B and C and E and F, if you play like an E, you're also playing an F flat. So you're lowering F by one semitone. And then similarly, if you play F, you're raising E by one semitone, and you would have E sharp. But if you're not raising or lowering a pitch or a note, then that's considered a natural. And these are the symbols here for sharps and flats. And there is a symbol for a natural. A natural kind of like almost looks like a little like picture frame, like sort of like that kind of symbol. It's really not used that often. The only time you would use that is if you were like, you would like transpose or modulated a key like on a piece, and you were going from one key signature to another, and say previously you were in a key signature that had a B flat, and you were going to a key signature that didn't have a B flat, then you might use the natural symbol to note that those that the B is no longer flat, but that's now a B natural. Not super common, not necessary, and if you're writing a key that's all in one key, then you would never even run into that issue. Scale versus key. So this is what we were talking about in our second week. So scales referring to the notes order by pitch. So when we go C, D, E, F, G, A, B, right back to C, that's the C major scale. So no sharps, no flats. And it's named after the tonic. So the very first note, we start on C, so it's the C major scale. When we're playing in a key, it's referring to the scale that we're using. So scale and key are not the same thing, but they overlap. So your key is, remember we were talking about like all the chords and things that we can play, and those notes, those exist within that key, but the key is based on the scale. So when you know the scale, then you know all the notes that you can play in when you're playing in that key. And similar to how the scale is named after the tonic, so is the key. So when you play in the key of C major, you're playing the scale of C major. And then our key signature is on our like on our sheet music. It's going to be right after our treble clef, and our time signature and all that stuff. It's going to show you how many sharps or flats. If you don't see any, then that means that it's going to be in either A minor or C major. And here's our circle of fifths. So very helpful diagram. These on here are showing you all the different key signatures as well as the relative major and minor. So we have our major keys out here on the outside big ring, and then our relative minors here on the smaller inner ring. And it's called a circle of fifths because we're going by fifths. So if we start here on C, and again, I know you can't see my piano here, but just think alphabet. So if we start on C and we go up 5, we go C, 1, D, 2, E, 3, F4, G, 5. So the next is G, and we have 1 sharp because we're raising. So we're going 1 sharp. When we're lowering, going left the other direction, again, it would be 5 the other direction. So we start on C and go backwards. Then we go C to B to A, and then G is where we end. So C and G are those beginning ends. G, and then F. And so then F would be the fifth going the opposite direction. And then to find your relative major and minor, it's going to be the 6th note. So if we start on C, C1, D2, E3, 4, 5, 6, we're going to end up on A. So A minor as a relative major or relative minor of C major. And that works for all of them. So you start on G and go 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You end up on E and you get E minor. And then the reason why you would want to use a So when we have the relative major and minors, those are referred to as enharmonics. So they have the exact same notes, but obviously a different order because we're going to start, for example, on B flat versus starting on D flat or C sharp. The reason why you would use one over another is going to, so like you can see D flat and C sharp. So we have 5 flats here, and then we have 6 sharps. 6 sharps is almost redundant, like using that many sharps. So if you really want to write in something that sounds like C sharp, then maybe you'll write in D flat because that's just going to be a little bit easier to play, going to be easier to write. It's not going to be super confusing, not having so many sharps or flats. So that's kind of like a reason why you might use a relative major over the minor, or use one of these like enharmonic keys here, as you see like in this like red area. Okay, so this is what we were covering previously, talking about chords. I believe this was last week. So chords are going to be anytime we play a note together. So if I play C, E, and then G, all individually like I just did, those would be an arpeggio. It's a broken chord is another way you could refer to it. If I play them together, that's a chord. So they're played all at the same exact time. When we play a chord that has 3 notes, that's a triad. So think tricycle, triad, 3 notes. And then we have different types of chords. So we talked about major, minor, augmented, and diminished. Which I'm gonna move here. So when we talked about the major chord, so here's the key of C major. So all the different chords there. So when we talk about the major chords, which is what you'd be playing if you were playing a major key or major scale. So it's the root, the major third, and the perfect fifth. So if you're playing a C major chord, we have C, E, G, right? That's a C major chord. So if you're looking at a piano, it's almost like skipping every other white key, C, E, G. So you're skipping the D and the F, C major. C major, easy to scale because you're just gonna keep going down the piano. So let me see if I can try to, so very easy versus like playing like, you know, something that involves like the black keys, like the sharps and flats. So this would be like a D major chord, D, F sharp, A. But still a major chord. And then they're always numbered using Roman numerals. So 1 through 7, and then your 7th is a diminished chord. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Oh, so then with their minor chords, it's going to be also numbered through Roman numerals, 1 through 7. But as you can see, it's inverted as far as which ones are major and minor. So we have it where our 2nd, 3rd, 6th, and 7th chords are going to be minor in the major key, versus the minor, it's going to be major 3rd, major 6th, and major 7th. And then your 2nd chord is the one that's diminished. And then diminished is when we lower it a half step or lower it a semitone. So our example was B, D, F. That's a diminished chord, and it almost sounds like eerie, like spooky, like, and that's a diminished chord versus a minor chord, which is B, D, F sharp. So then we lower it a semitone from F sharp to F natural. So then that would be our diminished, or B diminished. And remembering that major and minor, so C major and A minor, the relative major and minor keys, and scales as well. So they have the exact same chords. So if you look, we have C, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and C major coming back around. The exact same chords here. So anywhere where you don't see a letter, where it's just the letter by itself, that means it's major. So A minor, B diminished, C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, and then back to A minor, the exact same chords that are over here. And you would play them the exact same way. So whenever you see, if we were playing the key of B flat, the B flat that's in that is going to be the same B flat that's in the key E minor. It's going to be the exact same way you form it. These are just the keys where if you're playing the chord progressions, which we talked about last week, these are the chords that can exist in that chord progression when you're playing in that key. Oh, and then, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this with major chords. So major chords can become augmented when you raise them a half step. So like when we did diminished, we lowered that F sharp to F natural. If we were raising it, then it would become G natural. And then talking about chord progressions. So chord progression is when we're playing the chords in some kind of pattern, some kind of rhythm, and those chords all come from that chord from that key. So if we were doing something that was in the key of A minor, remember we had all these different ones. We had like the 1, 4, 5, 1, 6, 4, 3, all different kind of combinations, and we're referring to the Roman numerals here. And you see down here when we talk about those chord progressions. So if we were playing a 1, 4, 5 chord progression, we would be playing A minor, and then when I say 1, 4, 5, A minor, then D minor, and then E minor. And that's a chord progression. And then sometimes you would come back to A, so going like. That's a chord progression. And when you do a chord progression in a song, as we saw with like Achy Breaky Heart, where he was just going from E to A major over and over again throughout the whole song, you can make it that like simple. You can make it as complex as the one I just did, where it's just the 3 chords over and over again. You could do different chord progressions for every part of the song. Every time you go from the chorus to the verse or anything like that, you could do a different chord progression. It's kind of up to what you need for your song and what you're trying to convey. Maybe when you're writing a particular song, the lyrics are more important than the song. Or maybe you're only making instrumental music and you're like, oh, I could get kind of boring if I'm only using the same 3 chords the whole song. So it's just going to depend on what you're writing. And lastly, what we talked about last week were inversions. And so inversions are where we take the chord and we're basically giving it a new bass note. So what we have here, the C major. So remember C, E, G. The lowest note, which is the bass note here. So think about like the bass clef being like right below where we have our treble clef here. So C is our lower note than G, which is higher, right? So in first inversion, we move that C, and remember F-A-C-E, face. So we're moving that C above where now our E is our lowest note. And whenever we do that, we refer to these like how it would be written would be C/E, because C, which is our root position, or C, I'm sorry, which is our root note, our tonic, is over E, which is now our bass note. So then that chord would become E, G, C versus so now E is lower than our C. Our C is much higher. And so that's an inversion, or first inversion. And the second inversion is our C would still stay up here, no longer be in our bass note, but now we'd also move the E now above our C, where that makes our G our bass note, which we would write this as C/G or C over G, meaning G is now our bass note. So then we would be playing G, C, E. I'm sorry, G, C, E. So root position, first inversion, second inversion, So tonally, we're kind of getting the same sound because it's the same notes, right? So the reason why you would do inversion is mainly like as far as like piano and even guitar, it can make it easier to play. So the example that we had I had given before is that if you were going to go from say G to like A minor or something like that, it's much easier to move your hand the least amount as possible to make it easier to play. So instead of going from C major over here and then having to lift your hand up and move over, now to go to A minor or A minor, you could stay here and G over C or C over G, sorry, and then just slightly move your hand because an A minor chord is A, C, E, natural, no sharps or flats. And then a C major chord is C, E, G. So those notes you have in common are C and E. So then I can go for my C over G, and all I have to do is move my, I'm sorry, I know that you can't do this, sorry. So here I am playing C over G. If I just move this finger right here, now I'm playing an A minor chord. It's just that simple. Versus me having to go from here and then lifting my hand up and coming over here. It can be a lot more awkward, especially when you're first learning the instrument. And since you're not losing anything because you're still playing the exact same notes, it really can't hurt to use inversions. And when you're inverting any chord, major or minor, doesn't matter, this is how you do it. So you're not taking away any notes, you're just reordering which note is going to be your lowest note. So again, for the root position, C, E, G, and then when we come into first inversion, E is now our lowest note. So then we have E, G, C, and then for our second inversion, G is our lowest note, and we have G, C, E. So any questions on the recap, anything that was confusing from last week or anything like that before we move on to the last two sort of new ideas that we're going to bring into play? Okay, so what we're going to talk about first are melodies and harmony. So what is a melody? So a melody, it's that combination of pitch and rhythm. And that kind of makes it sound like this big abstract thing. It's something that you totally already know what it is, and you've probably heard the term melody before. It can also be referred to as like the tune, the line. And it's, if you were thinking of the song Happy Birthday, and you were to sing that happy birthday to you, that tune that you're singing, that is the melody. Oh, sorry, let's see, we have a question. Yes, all of the videos from the last 3 weeks are going to be posted to our YouTube channel. Yeah, so whenever you like, if I were to like name any song that you've ever heard, and I were to ask you how does it go, and you were to like sing it or hum it, you're gonna be humming that melody. It'd be very impressive and very interesting if you were to, you know, like hum or sing the like bass guitar, you know, harmony or something like that. But most likely you're going to sing the song. So if we were playing Happy Birthday, that's that melody. So those individual notes and that rhythm. So that dun 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 dun, that's that rhythm, and then the pitch is that C C D C. So it's that pitch and rhythm. That's your melody. Those individual notes, and then they're often repeated throughout the song or during that part. So this is our melody for this part. This is our melody for that part. So the happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, different pitch. Now we're lower, blah, blah, you know, and it keeps going. The pitch kind of changes, but those notes, those individual notes, as that pitch is changing, that's that melody. And then that rhythm, happy birthday, dun, 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 that's the melody. So when we talk about harmony, harmony is something that we've totally already talked about. We just didn't refer to it in this concept, But harmony is when notes get played at the same time. So this is a chord, but it's harmony. So harmonies is kind of considered like the vertical, while melody is considered the horizontal. So melody, the versus the chord being, and if we think of that like visual from, let me go back here, of this being a chord here, think of it, that vertical going up, versus when we've just seen like individual notes, and I don't have it in here, sorry, the individual like notes that like C and then here and then here and here, that going across horizontally, that's our melody. So harmony and chords, that not exactly synonyms, but when you're playing a harmony, you're playing notes that are at the same time, and that gets you a chord. And then when you play chords in succession, you get a chord progression. So we're playing harmony and we're playing a chord progression because we're playing these notes at the same time. So how would you write a melody? So when you're writing your melody, try writing, so you can write either or. So you could come up with your melody first. So again, how the song goes, or you could write your chord progression first. So if we're writing our chord progression in the key of C major, and we want to do C, G, D minor, right? We would want to, when we're playing our melody over those notes, we would want to choose notes that are played, or I'm sorry, notes that that exist in those chords. So we have C, E, G, we have D, F, A, and then we have G, B, D for those three chords, the C major, D minor, and G major. So when you're playing those notes over it, you know, I might do, so that's C, D, F, and then going with that D minor, and I could do, so just playing notes that exist in that scale and that key. So I didn't play any sharps or flats, because if I'm in the key of C major, there are no sharps and flats. So you want to stick with those notes that are in the key. But to make it like interesting, where you're not just playing, okay, I'm playing D and then I'm also playing, you know, which you can do that. There's no rule against it, but you can make it interesting by adding what's called passing tones. And that's what this kind of diagram here is showing. So it's showing here, remember our base, so all cows eat grass, it's showing a whole note C here. And then it's showing these quarter notes and then this half note here, showing it playing an E and then going down to a D and then going to the C. So if you were to say that this was a C major chord, the chords or the notes that it's playing here for the melody has a C and the E. But instead of playing like a G or something like that, it's instead doing the D. So then it would be, and that sounds nice together, right? And it versus maybe going, when again, you're already playing those notes in the chord. You don't have to do that. You don't have to add passing notes. But it can just be something to sort of jazz it up, for lack of a better term, and to make it kind of sound interesting when you're doing your melodies. But you don't want to add in, again, notes that are not in the scale that you're playing within, the key you're playing in. So I wouldn't want to do C, D sharp, E, or something like that. I would want to keep the notes that I'm playing in. So those 7 notes, those are the ones that you're going to stick with, but you can use passing notes and it's still going to sound fine because those notes are in that key. Another thing that you could use are neighboring notes, or auxiliary notes, and those are notes that, so when we're looking here, C, D, and E, so it's going, or I'm sorry, E, E, D, C. So those, it's kind of just doing like in succession. So it's like this note, and then we know we need to get this low. So, okay, so we're going to do a note that's like right in the middle. If you were to do a note that was higher, So you, instead of doing like EDC, you did EFC. That would be doing a neighboring tone or an auxiliary tone. And that's where it's higher or lower. So if you went EFC or if you went EBC, those would be using an auxiliary or a neighboring tone, versus a passing tone is kind of just going to that note that's right in between them anyway, versus going, and so you see how that sounds different. Or in the reverse. So when you play notes that would be like in order, so C, D, E, or again, the reverse, E, D, C, your brain kind of knows like where it's going. You're like, okay, dun, dun, dun. It's like in that order, but it can be more interesting if it kind of goes up and down, because then you're like, oh, well, where's this going to go? So a little predictable, but totally fine, but a little more interesting, because your brain's thinking, well, we're just going to keep going lower, we're going to keep going higher, but going back and forth can just add a little something else to it. And this is really helpful too, to kind of think about, okay, what are the different ways that I can add a little something extra to my melody or do something different with it. When we talked about before about, are you going to write your whole piece of work, like if you're doing like a full album or something like that, are they all going to be written in major keys, or are they all going to be written in minor keys? Are you going to do a mixture of it? Are you going to try to never repeat that same key? You don't want to do too many things in G major or something like that. What if you do want to write 2 songs in G major and you want it to just like, you want it to stand out a little bit? Then you could just make it where your melody is different. So yes, they're going to contain maybe the same chords, maybe not the exact same chord progression, but if your melody is different, then that'll kind of what'll help differentiate. I'm sure over the course of musicians who have hundreds of songs, they've written more than one song, obviously, right? And like in the same key, but they'll sound different because they have different melodies. And this is a way where you can make those melodies different. So what if I come up with a melody and I don't know what notes to play? So let's say you write a chord progression and you really like it, and you write lyrics like for it, and you're singing them sort of along with playing, and you feel like you're singing in key. So you're like, I've made a melody, it goes along with this chord progression I've made, it goes along with these chords, but I don't really know what these notes are. Maybe my ear training's not really good. I'm like, I don't know if I'm singing a G or a B or a B flat or whatever this is. That's not the end of the world. When we talk about writing your music down, that's first of all not a hard and fast rule. Every song you write does not have to be written down on sheet music. If we kind of refer back to the first workshop where we talked about why you would even write down sheet music, it's to communicate with other musicians or to communicate to someone else. Say you don't actually want to play the songs you write, you just want to write them and have someone else play them. Well, you have to find a way to tell someone how to play the song, right? So that's a reason why you would write sheet music. You write sheet music for a singer, and the singer reads sheet music and she wants to know what's the rhythm that I'm playing in or rhythm that I'm singing in, because voice is considered an instrument. Even when we're just talking, this is pitch. My voice is at a different pitch than someone else, and when I'm singing, I'm going to be singing in different pitches. And if you have a singer who reads sheet music and they're like, well, I want to know how I'm supposed to sing your song. So that's the benefit of being able to write down music, is to be able to show other people, and maybe even helpful for you to remember. So you write this great song and you love it, it's good, and you step away from it, maybe years, months, days, and you remember, oh, how did that song go? Well, if you just play that song, you record it and that's it, that doesn't tell you, that tells you what it sounds like, but that might not tell you exactly what you did. Writing down your music is going to tell you what you did and how you did it. If you can only write down your chord progression and you're not sure what this melody is that you're singing, that's not really a huge issue. But if you really want to try to well, I really want to know what my melody is, because maybe, I'm not going to sing it. I want someone else to sing it. And it's not enough just for me to like show the chords or for me to sing it for them. Maybe I can't sing, you know, and I want to say like, well, this is how you would do it, but I'm thinking I'm a little off key. You know, I want to figure out what my melody is. Well, you want to remember that if you're playing in the key of G major, the only notes that can be in your melody are in the key of G major. So you really only got 7 notes that you could be singing for your melody. So it's definitely narrowed down what notes you could be singing. Again, if you're singing in key and you're like, well, that sounds right with these chords, well, it's got to be one of those 7. So if you were going through, you know, you could just and just play those notes, maybe while singing a line or singing a particular note. So if you're doing like, you know, again, happy birthday, you're like, happy, oh, happy, trying to figure out what key you're singing in. Again, that's only helpful if you're singing in key. But that's a way to figure out what key your melody is if it's something where you just hum. So you're playing along, you're like, and you're not really sure what that is. Well, then you can try to go through and figure out what those notes are by singing, kind of humming along with pianos, like, you're like, ooh, well, that's not it. That's not the note. So that's a way to figure that out. But again, it's not a huge deal unless you're writing it down to share with someone or writing it down so you don't forget how it goes. Okay, so any questions before we move on to final thing that we'll talk about tonight and for this workshop, which is song structure. So any questions on melodies, writing melodies? And this video, like the other ones, will be available on our Facebook, or no, I'm sorry, not our Facebook, our YouTube. Okay, so lastly, we're going to talk about song structure. So the whole purpose of this workshop is was to talk about music theory, but also it's the fundamentals of music theory for composition. So the end goal with this workshop and sort of the idea for the people who wanted to attend it is to start composing your own songs, start writing, start maybe recording or playing these songs. So an important thing to talk about is song structure. So you know how to play the chords and you know the keys and all of that, but how do you form a song? Most of us are aware, sort of maybe intuitively, how a song is formed because we've heard music before, right? So you've heard a song and you know the words of the song, you can sing along to it, you know how it goes, you know the words and everything. But maybe you haven't sat down and analyzed and said, okay, well, this is this part of the song, and then this is how this works, and here are examples of how that goes. So that's what we're going to talk about here. All right, so the parts of a song. Most of us have at least heard of these terms before. So sort of going in this like little circle here. So we're talking about intro and outro. So this would oh, thank you. So the intro and an outro. So these are usually sort of that like, especially with the intro, this is like, as soon as you enter the song, this is that like opening riff, or maybe like the drums kind of come in, nothing else, and it's building anticipation. So it's the very first thing when you hear. And I want to say first that not every song will have all of these parts. They may have all of them, they may have just some of them, they may have only one of them, and we'll talk about that in the next couple of slides, you know, what ways you can sort of rearrange these and everything. But when your song, if you're going to write a song that has an intro, typically what's going to be doing is going to be building that anticipation for like, okay, well, what's coming next? So it's usually either slower, or like I said, it just has like the drums and maybe the piano hasn't come in just yet. Or maybe it's just the piano and you're like, oh, this song's kind of like maybe slow and sad. And then suddenly the drums come in, you're like, oh, well, this is a totally different song. You know, it's building that anticipation, what's coming. Your intro could just be spoken. Maybe like it's just your voice that's there. It could be maybe humming or scatting or something like that, but it's building up to our next part here, which is the verse. Versus the outro, And your intro and outro could be the same. So maybe you start off with, you know, just like a 4 count of drums, and maybe you end with the same thing. So you have that resolution, like, all right, here's how we came in, here's the start of our roller coaster, and now we've come all the way back around to the start. Or your outro can also be, which was super common, especially like the 80s and stuff like that, where it just fades out. So just, you know, the chorus or something like that just keeps going and going. So slowly you just don't hear anything anymore. There's no true resolution. That's totally okay to do. And that, so then your outro of sorts would just be that fading out. Or you might consider, well, I don't have an outro. And a song like Hey Jude, where it's just like the na 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 na, and he does that for like 4 minutes. That's sort of like that outro, or that coda is another term for that, like ending. And then so verse. So verse, when we talk about a verse lyrically, a verse is going to sort of set up that storytelling. So you're telling the story of, you know, love, it's a love song, or the story of a party, or a story of your life, or whatever that your song is about. Lyrically, this is where you sort of set them up to then knock them down in the chorus. So you're building that, you know, you're introducing these ideas that are going to be in the rest of the song, or what the song is about. That's lyrically what your verse would be. Musically, your verse is going to it's going to have usually its own chord progression. Again, we saw examples last week where that's not the case. It repeats throughout. But if you're doing it sort of like, well, this part has its own chord progression, this part has, you know, this different one, your verses will usually have the same chord progression. Where it would get different is in your pre-chorus, or your chorus, your bridge, or your intro outro. Your verse would have like its own unique chord progression. So in your verse, you go C, G, A minor, something like that. And then when you bleed into your pre-chorus, if you have one, then your pre-chorus might have maybe those same chords from the verse, maybe a little bit something extra, maybe a different instrument comes in. And then when you hit your chorus, that's when it has that, like, your chorus is usually supposed to be like bigger. So maybe your verse is all just piano melody, your pre-chorus maybe as in a guitar riff or something like that. Then your chorus is where it gets big and everything comes together. And that's when, you know, you have your drums and saxophone or whatever's going on with it. Or it could just be when you talk about it lyrically, this is that part that just keeps repeating, and it's like almost like the thesis of the song. So your verse is like, well, here are all these ideas, and that chorus is just like over and over again, here is like the main central idea. So a song like Beautiful Day by U2, you know, he's talking about all these things that make it the beautiful day in the verses, but in the chorus, it's just him saying over and over again, you know, it was a beautiful day. And then other lyrics that I can't remember off the top of my head, but the part of him just saying it was a beautiful day. If you do have a chorus where it's just like 1 or 2 lines that repeat over and over again, and every time you come back to the chorus, which again would typically sound musically different for whatever reason, either instrumentation or has a different chord progression. If it's just 1 or 2 lines, or maybe like it's not words, it's just la 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 or something like that, that would be considered a refrain. So like for song like caroling songs, so like la 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 la, that's the refrain for Deck the Halls. So the choruses, or I'm sorry, the verses would be like deck the halls, blah 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 blah, and then every time you come back around to sing la 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 la, that would be your refrain, because it's just kind of like one line, but it repeats over and over again after the verses. And so that's why it's a refrain. And so you might not even have like thought about Deck the Halls having a chorus or a refrain, but it definitely does. And that's how you kind of like notice it. Another like example like of a refrain would be sorry, totally just blanked. I had the song. Oh, Brown Eyed Girl. You know, you're my brown-eyed girl. And I remember when we were singing la 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 la. Every time he says that, it's really only a couple of lines, and then he's just singing that la 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 part over and over again. That would be the refrain. So his verses are, you know, a lot of other stuff he's talking about, but as soon as he gets to that, like, you're my brown-eyed girl, we were saying fa la la, that's the refrain. It's not long, it's not overly complex. It's just that over and over again, la la la. That makes it more of a refrain than a chorus. They can be interchangeable. A refrain can be referred to as a chorus, or I'm sorry, a chorus can be referred to as a refrain, but a refrain usually isn't referred to as a chorus. So it's one of those like weird things where like a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square kind of thing. A refrain is always short and repetitive, and a chorus is always usually a little bit longer, a little bit more involved, lyrically. Musically, they could totally be kind of like an interchanged type of like a matter of like semantics, because your chord progression or your instrumentation, everything like that, this is that part of the song, you can refer to it as either, but lyrically, a refrain is usually much simpler and shorter than a chorus would be. And then a post-chorus is what it sounds like. It would happen after the chorus. Musically, like as far as like the harmonies, the chord progression are usually the same. It's usually that the melody is a little bit different. So like in a song like Sia's like Chandelier, that song where it's like I'm gonna swing from the chandelier. Well, that part's the chorus, but then when her like melody changes, right, you can hear that sort of like it's like a lower like pitch, like lower register she's singing in, and she's like, I'm just holding on for tonight, you know, that kind of part. That would be the post chorus. So it can be mistaken as being like, well, this is all the chorus, but if her melody changes, but musically it's still the exact same as the chorus, that would be the post chorus. So you can kind of even think of like the verse and pre-chorus in that same kind of way, where it's like, well, this is, you know, this is like happening before the chorus, but it's not quite the same melody as the chorus, not quite the same melody as the verse, but the chords kind of overlap or very similar. That would be your pre-chorus. And then when we talk about our bridge, finally, so not all songs have bridges. As I said before, some of the songs or some songs have all these parts, some of them only have a few of them. A bridge is also sometimes referred to as a middle eight. And it's referred to as a middle eight because if you're thinking in terms of like bars, so you have an 8-bar verse, an 8-bar chorus, your middle eight. So a bridge is always like right in the middle of the song. So usually like verse, chorus, bridge, and then another chorus, and then the song is over. So if you have a 32-bar song, your bridge is that 8 bars right in the middle of all those verses and choruses. And it's usually sandwiched in between 2 choruses. And it would also sort of be a it's usually like kind of like a reprieve from the repetitiveness of your like verse and chorus melody. So your bridge would have a different melody. And then your bridge might even be different instrumentally. Sometimes it'll have a similar chord progression to like your chorus or your refrain, but the melody, what you're singing, would sound a little bit different. It could be even like bigger or more like dramatic than your chorus, or it could be like more low key, just so it really stands out. So maybe your chorus is super high energy, then your bridge is kind of like a break from that, and not suddenly we're like we're sad, we're down, and then it builds anticipation back up because we want to be high energy again. We want to be back to where we were in the chorus. We had our little break, now we want to come back, and that's when your chorus comes back in much bigger, and now it's almost like more appreciated because you had that break from the bridge. And so we'll get now next is sort of like the order that we can put these in. So some of these song structures that we have are song forms. So we have like verse, chorus, verse, chorus. That's something that we're probably all familiar with. So we have 2 unique verses, then 2 choruses that repeat. Then we have verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. So this again, what I was talking about with that like 32 bar song or like middle 8. So we have 2 verses that are different lyrically, but the same harmony-wise, chord progression-wise. Choruses, they absolutely repeat. Bridge is different. Just a variation on this basic verse, chorus. you can add a pre or post chorus in here. If you do add a pre-chorus, you may or may not want to have a bridge, depending on how long your verse, pre-chorus, and chorus are. So if those are all 8 bars or 30 seconds or something like that, you could end up with like a 5-6 minute song if you also add a bridge in there. But that's totally your prerogative. If you want to have a 5-6 minute song, you totally can. Hallelujah, the Leonard Cohen version that has like all the verses, is a very, very long song. Sometimes people cover it, that's why they leave certain verses out. Verse refrain, very basic. So it's just where it's just unique verses that have the same melody, but lyrically are different. And then that repeating refrain. So it gets something like Brown Eyed Girl would be like verse refrain. Then verse, verse, verse would have no chorus. So there's nothing that repeats as far as like lyrically the same. That's a different melody from the verses. So the verses are just over and over again. Same melody, but different lyrically. So something like I Walk the Line by Johnny Cash would be verse, verse, verse. And you could also maybe consider that one verse refrain because he says the like, because you're mine, I walk the line part, like after each verse. But that one's considered usually more verse, 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 or AAA, because it doesn't have a chorus and because the I walk the line part is basically the same melody as the rest of the verse. And then verse, verse, chorus is, again, just variation and kind of mixing it up, where instead you have 2 verses back to back and then the chorus. And you could do verse, verse, chorus, and then another verse and another chorus. That happens a lot like in pop songs where there's 2 verses back to back. Again, musically the same, lyrically different, and then the repeating chorus. And you might only hear the chorus once, but the chorus is different musically and lyrically than the verses. Sometimes people consider this verse, verse like bridge. It doesn't really matter. It's more that you're differentiating that these are different parts. And then lastly, just these are different song forms. And as always, like if you want to email me, I won't play 10 songs. We wouldn't even have time for that. But these are just different examples of different ways that you can form songs versus the typical verse chorus that we're used to. So for chorus verse, we have Rich Girl by Hall & Oates and Carry On Wayward Son by Kansas. Those songs, if you think about them, if you're familiar with these songs, they immediately start with the chorus. There's no intro. It just immediately jumps in lyrically and musically with what the chorus is, and then it goes into its verse, comes back to the chorus. And so I believe like for Rich Girl, there's like 3 choruses and 2 verses, versus usually it's like maybe like the reverse, or there's an even number of verses and choruses. But these 2 songs jump right in with the chorus. And there's no intro. So it's just immediately the chorus. And you could have like intro and then chorus. But these ones are that's where it immediately jumps in. Verse refrain, so again, Hallelujah. And then Louis Armstrong's What a Wonderful World. So he talks about it in his like verses, all things that make it a wonderful world. And then he says for his refrain, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. And that's a different melody, but it's that one line. So it's a refrain versus being a chorus. Songs that are just all verses, no choruses. Bohemian Rhapsody, it's like 4 verses that are different lyrically, and they're a bit different, especially instrumentation wise. Again, if you're familiar with the song, but there's no chorus. There's no like section where it repeats lyrically or musically. The song by Phoebe Bridgers, Moon Song, same thing. It's just a series of verses that have the same melody, but with no chorus. Another thing too you can do is just have the same verse over and over again. So we've been kind of like harping on this thing of like, oh, the verses need to be different lyrically. They really don't have to. For the Cars, Just What I Needed, and for the Killers, Mr. Brightside, the verses have no different lyrics. They're different lyrically than the chorus, but the verse, pre-chorus, and chorus to Mr. Brightside and for Just What I Needed repeat just over and over again. They repeat twice, I believe, for each song. So you can definitely do that. If you're like, you know what, this verse says all I need to say, and that's all you want to write, you don't want to have to write another verse, but you want the song to be longer than like a minute and a half, you can just repeat it all over again, and totally get away with it because these were very big, popular songs. And then sort of a variation, on all what we've been talking about, where it's sort of rule breaking. Tracy Chapman's Fast Car has like a couple different verses in the beginning, and then it goes chorus, and then it does like another verse, and then it does chorus, and then it has like a bridge that can almost be another verse, and then right back around to another chorus, and then it's outro. So that one has all the different parts we're talking about, but totally a different variation. And then finally, Don Henley's The Boys of Summer. It does have the traditional verse, chorus, bridge type of form, but the choruses actually have different lyrics every time, and it's a slight change in the lyrics. So generally, it's almost the same thing. You might not even notice it at first, but there are different lines for, and I believe he has 4 choruses in there. All the choruses have a different line. It's a different line every single time, like in the same spot. That's definitely a variation. For all the other songs listed here, the choruses are totally the exact same each time. So yeah, so just to sort of like resolve here, what we're talking about here is that these are all the different parts. You do not have to do one of these things and totally stick with it. It's going to depend on the song you're writing, the impact that you want to have, for these songs. And these songs are all like very unique, very different from each other. They have different energies, different vibes that they're trying to, convey. And so it's just going to be about what it is that you want for your song, how you're going to structure the song. Okay, so sorry about that. Okay, so that was it. I know, sorry, I kind of went through it a little fast. We were trying to make sure we didn't run over like last week. But this recording will be, on our YouTube, and then I can send the presentation to anyone who would like a copy of it. And I did want to mention too, before we finish, for end of June going into July, I'll be doing another similar series, where it's like multi-week, but it'll be more about recording music. So if you did want to get started on like writing music and want to just start figuring out how to like record your projects, that'll be what that is geared towards. And if anyone has any questions before we end.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Earlier, when you were talking about the melody,
Mhm.
you mentioned that you stay in the same key that you start with. Well, I have some melodies that occasionally maybe have a sharp or a flat that's not in the original key, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, too. It's sort of like, am I right in thinking it's sort of like what you were saying about the structure of the song? Sometimes you might vary slightly from the rules, depending upon, as long as it holds together.
Yeah, so yeah, for sure. So when we and it's kind of like what we like touched on a little bit when we talk about music theory, is that we're giving these like rules of how things work and how things are. But if you break those rules in a way where it still sounds good and it still sounds pleasant to the ear, so maybe you do a like diminished chord or something like that, like a sharp or flat major or minor chord that doesn't exist in that key. It's like, again, for like C major, maybe instead of doing that B diminished, you do for whatever reason, and an A diminished or something like that, and it still sounds good and still works. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Okay,
Cool. Any other questions? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Totally appreciate everyone coming, especially those of you who have been here for all of the programs. And again, we will be putting all of these on the YouTube for any kind of refresher or recap that you would like, always feel free to email me with any more questions you have with music theory, or if you get any questions you have later. We're always here in Creative Experience for help if anyone needs to, or anyone would like to come in and start working on things. And then again, look for next month in July for the workshop on recording your music. So all this music that you're going to go out and compose after today, you have some way to share it with people.